Waitress comforted a sad old man. She didn't know he owned half the city. He sat alone at the corner booth, the rain tracing long, trembling lines down the fogged window beside him. His suit was immaculate, but slightly undone. A top button open, a tie hanging loose, the posture of a man used to commanding rooms but too tired to care tonight. The diner's neon sign flickered its red and white light across his face, revealing eyes that carried the exhaustion of decades. When Lily approached with her usual gentle smile, she didn't recognize him, not as the man whose name was printed on the sides of skyscrapers, hospitals, and half the luxury apartments in the city. To her, he was just another customer with a heavy heart. She set down a steaming cup of coffee before him and said softly, "Rough night?" He looked up, startled by the sincerity in her voice. No one ever asked him that. Not board members, not journalists, not the lawyers who lived off his fortune, and certainly not strangers. "Something like that," he replied quietly, his deep voice cracking just enough to betray the truth. She nodded, folding her order pad against her chest. "Coffee helps. So does talking if you want. But the coffee's cheaper." He almost smiled, almost subscribed to support our stories, the kind that remind you kindness still matters. Lily had been working at Rose's diner for 6 years, ever since her father passed away. Her mother's health bills kept climbing, and college had to wait. But she didn't mind. There was something comforting about the rhythm of this place, the sound of rain on the windows, the hiss of the grill, the faces she saw every day. She liked the smallness of it, the honesty. The man in the corner, however, didn't belong in a place like this. He was too polished, too controlled. Even his silence seemed expensive. But there was sadness there, not the kind that came from loss, but the kind that came from loneliness that money couldn't touch. "What's your name?" she asked, refilling his coffee without waiting for permission. He hesitated. It was rare for him to hesitate over anything. "Henry," he finally said. She smiled. "Well, Henry, I make the best blueberry pie in this part of the city. It's on the house tonight. I don't take charity. It's not charity." "It's coffee's best friend," she said simply. He blinked, and for the first time in a long time, someone's words made him laugh. Just a breath of it, soft and disbelieving, but real. When Lily walked away, he followed her with his eyes. She moved with quiet grace, like someone who carried her own storms, but didn't let them show. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him without fear or agenda. Henry Caldwell, the man behind Caldwell Enterprises, the name that opened doors and crushed competitors, had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something. A signature, a favor, an introduction. But this waitress, she offered him pie and a smile. No pretense, no hidden motive. He didn't know what compelled him to come back the next night, or the night after that. Lily began to notice the pattern. He would always sit at the same booth, order the same thing, black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and sometimes the blueberry pie if she offered it with that teasing grin. They rarely talked about him. Instead, he listened. She told him about her mother's garden, about her late father who had taught her to fix anything with duct tape and patience, about how she dreamed of studying architecture one day because she loved the idea of building something that lasted. He found himself listening more than he had in years. But what she didn't know, what no one in that little diner knew, was that the man sitting quietly by the window had the power to buy and sell everything in sight. And yet, for all his wealth, Henry had never felt poorer than when she spoke about dreams he'd long forgotten to have. One night, as closing time approached, Lily found him still there, staring at his untouched coffee. The rain had returned, tapping gently against the glass. "Long day?" she asked, hanging her apron on the hook behind the counter. He nodded. "They all are." She leaned against the booth across from him. "You don't strike me as the kind of man who lets days run him over." "Everyone has a breaking point," he murmured. "Then you need pie," she said, standing up before he could argue. When she returned, she placed a plate before him, warm and smelling like cinnamon and sugar. He looked up, and for a fleeting second, he saw in her eyes something he'd never found in boardrooms or penthouses: understanding. "I lost my wife years ago," he said quietly. almost as if confessing to himself. And my son stopped speaking to me after that. I built an empire to fill the silence. Lily's hand rested on the edge of his table, still but steady. Maybe silence isn't meant to be filled. Maybe it's meant to be shared. The words hung between them, simple, disarming, and far too human for a man who'd spent his life hiding behind balance sheets and walls of glass. He didn't reply. He couldn't. But that night, for the first time in years, Henry Caldwell didn't go home to his empty penthouse. He stayed in the diner until the lights dimmed, watching her wipe down tables, hum softly to herself, and lock the door behind her. He felt something shift inside him, not a decision, but an awakening. The next morning, his assistant handed him a folder about a failing business property downtown. "Rose's Diner," she said. "The owner's looking to sell. It's not a profitable venture, but the land value." Henry cut her off. "Buy it." "Sir, it's not—" "I said buy it." She blinked, surprised. He never bought anything without strategy, without return, but something in his tone said this wasn't about profit. As the papers were signed, Henry thought of the woman who had given him pie instead of pity, kindness instead of calculation. He didn't know what he planned to do with the diner, or what she'd think when she found out. But one thing was certain. For the first time in years, he wanted to be somewhere that didn't need his name on the door to feel like home. And when Lily arrived for her morning shift, she would find a notice taped to the door, "New ownership." Her hands trembled as she read the signature at the bottom, "Henry Caldwell." Lily stood frozen in front of the diner door, the rain still dripping from her umbrella. The name on the notice glared at her, Henry Caldwell. She blinked several times, certain there had to be a mistake. The man who'd sat at her booth night after night, the man who always asked about her mother and complimented her pie, couldn't possibly be that Henry Caldwell. The billionaire whose face appeared on magazine covers, whose companies stretched across continents. Her heart beat fast, confusion threading through disbelief. She felt foolish for not having recognized him. His watch alone could have paid for her mother's medicine for a year. But he'd seemed so human, so ordinary. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee and cinnamon greeted her, but everything suddenly felt different, heavier, almost unreal. The other waitresses whispered among themselves, reading the notice with wide eyes. "I heard his company owns half the downtown properties," said one. "Why would he buy this place?" Lily didn't have an answer, but deep down, she felt a quiet unease, the kind that came when the world shifted without warning. Later that morning, as she wiped the counter, the doorbell chimed. Henry walked in, same tailored suit, same calm posture. But now she saw it, the subtle confidence of a man used to power, the weight of someone who could command entire cities with a signature. Her breath caught. "Good morning, Lily," he said softly, as if nothing had changed. "Oh, you bought this place," she replied, her voice calm but strained. "Yes," he paused. "It needed saving," she frowned. "From what? We were doing fine." He studied her expression, the quiet fire in her eyes, the unspoken disappointment. "I didn't mean to interfere, I just thought that I needed rescuing," she interrupted, her tone sharper than she intended. "No," he said quickly, "that this place deserved rescuing." She exhaled, setting the rag aside. "You don't have to play the hero, Henry. This isn't one of your mergers." Something flickered across his face, hurt, though he hid it well. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He hesitated, his silence saying more than words ever could. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the distance between them, soft and steady. Finally, he said, "I didn't buy it for business. I bought it because it reminded me there are still places where people matter more than money." Her anger softened, replaced by something far more complicated, confusion, tenderness, and the ache of understanding. "Henry," she said quietly, "you don't have to prove anything to me." "I'm not trying to," he replied. "I'm trying to remember who I was before I forgot how to care." Lily turned away, pretending to refill sugar jars just to hide the emotion rising in her chest. He'd said it so plainly, so unlike the controlled man she thought she knew. There was truth in his voice, raw, unpolished truth. When the lunch rush came, Henry stayed, sitting at his usual booth but saying little. He watched her move through the crowd, her kindness so natural it almost hurt to see. Every smile she gave to a customer, every gentle gesture reminded him how far he'd drifted from simple humanity. At one point, a little boy spilled his chocolate milk across the floor. Lily crouched down, cleaned it up with a napkin, and told him it was just a little storm and storms always pass. The boy laughed, comforted. Henry's throat tightened. How long had it been since anyone comforted him like that? After closing, Lily found him still there. The diner was empty, chairs up on tables, the hum of the neon sign echoing softly in the silence. "You don't have to keep coming here," she said, trying to sound casual. "I know." "Then why do you?" He looked up, his eyes tired but warm. "Because it's the only place I feel like I can breathe." She froze, her hands tightening around the rag she held. "I've spent years surrounded by people who only talk to me because they have to," he continued. "But you looked at me like I was just a man drinking coffee. You asked how my day was. You gave me pie when I didn't deserve it." She swallowed hard. "I didn't have to buy the diner to say that. I didn't do it to say anything," he said. "I did it because I didn't want to lose the one place that reminded me what kindness felt like." Her defenses began to crack, though she tried to hold them together. "Henry, you can't buy kindness. You can't own it." "I know," he said quietly, "but I can protect it." She met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, everything else than the class divide, the power, the money, disappeared. It was just two people, standing in the golden glow of the diner's lights, bound by something neither could name. Then she stepped back. "Just promise me one thing," she said. "Anything. Don't change this place." "I won't." She nodded and turned off the last light. But as she walked away, Henry remained seated, his reflection faintly visible in the darkened window. A man with everything, yet still chasing something he didn't know how to define. When he finally left, the city lights blurred behind him like memories. In his penthouse that night, Henry sat by the window, a cup of black coffee in hand, staring at the skyline. But all he could see was the way she'd looked at him, with compassion, not admiration, with warmth, not calculation. He realized he didn't just want to be near her, he wanted to deserve her. The next morning, Lily arrived to find something different again. New uniforms, a polished espresso machine, and a vase of fresh roses on every table. She sighed. He's already changing things. But what she didn't see, or not yet, was the small note taped to the counter with her name on it. It read, "For the woman who taught me that kindness still builds more than money ever could." No signature, but she knew who it was from. Her fingers lingered on the paper, her chest tightening in quiet disbelief. Because somewhere deep down, she feared the truth she didn't dare say aloud, that she was beginning to care for him too. For the next few days, the diner buzzed with quiet wonder. The new espresso machine gleamed like a promise. The roses filled the air with soft perfume, and customers whispered about the mysterious man who had transformed the place overnight. But Lily couldn't shake the unease that crept in with every change. It wasn't the upgrades that bothered her. It was what they symbolized. Money had entered her safe little world, and with it came questions she didn't want to answer. Still, every evening Henry returned. Sometimes he ordered coffee, sometimes he simply sat and watched. Never demanding, never interrupting, just present. His presence was like the sound of rain against the window, constant, gentle, impossible to ignore. One night, as the clock neared closing, he spoke quietly while she wiped the counter. "Oh, you didn't like the flowers?" Lily looked up, surprised. "They're beautiful, but they made you uncomfortable." She hesitated, then sighed. "They don't belong here. This place was never meant to be polished. It's simple, honest." Henry nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You're right. But maybe I thought it deserved to be seen the way I see it. The way I see you." Her hand froze on the rag. The air between them thickened, trembling with something unsaid. He looked away, almost embarrassed by his own words. "I meant, you make things better just by being here. You don't need to fix anything, but somehow you do." Lily turned her back, pretending to rearrange the sugar jars, though her heart was racing. "You talk like you're not allowed to care about people, Henry." "I'm not sure I ever learned how," he admitted softly. There was a vulnerability in his voice that made her chest ache. She'd seen hints of it before, in the way he sometimes stared out the window too long, or how his hands lingered on the coffee cup even after it was empty. "What happened to you?" she asked gently, almost whispering. He hesitated. "Life, or maybe greed. I built things. I broke things. I lost people who mattered because I thought winning was everything. And now I sit here drinking coffee, wishing I'd learned the difference between building and destroying before it was too late." Lily's eyes softened. "It's not too late, Henry." He looked up, meeting her gaze, and for the first time she saw the man behind the empire, not the billionaire, but the soul that carried regrets like invisible scars. That night, when he left, the bell above the door chimed softly, and Lily stood still long after he was gone. The next morning, she found another note waiting for her, this time tucked inside a napkin on his usual table. "If I told you I built walls to protect myself, would you believe they've started to crumble every time you smile?" She read it 3 times before folding it carefully into her apron pocket. The day carried on like any other. Orders shouted from the kitchen, coffee cups clinking, laughter from regulars. But Lily felt a strange new current running beneath it all, like a melody only she could hear. Later that afternoon, a sleek black car parked across the street. It was impossible not to notice, long shining utterly out of place in their modest town. 2 men in dark suits entered, scanning the diner before spotting Henry at his usual booth. They approached him, speaking in low tones. She couldn't hear much, only fragments. "The board is waiting. Investors are threatening." Henry raised a hand, silencing them. "Not now." "But sir, I said not now." The men hesitated, glanced around the humble diner in visible discomfort, then left. Henry's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked like someone cornered between 2 worlds. Lily approached, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. "Problems from your other life?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Something like that. They don't understand why I come here." "Then don't explain," she said simply. "Some things are meant to be felt, not justified." He looked at her as if she'd said something sacred. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "But it's simple. The things that really matter usually are." Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to slow. He wanted to tell her that her simplicity was exactly what terrified him, because it made everything he'd built feel meaningless. Instead, he said, "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember my mom used to say that meaning isn't in where you are, it's in what you give. This diner gives me purpose." He nodded quietly. "Purpose?" he repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time in years. When the clock struck 10 and Lily began locking up, Henry stayed behind again, helping stack chairs without being asked. The gesture felt strange, a billionaire moving tables in a diner. But it made her smile. At the door, he hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think kindness is something people are born with or something they find again after losing it?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Both, but finding it again means you're still human." He seemed to absorb her words like oxygen. "Then maybe there's hope for me yet." When he left, Lily stood in the doorway watching him disappear into the night. A lonely figure against the streetlights, shoulders heavy with memories. Back inside, she unfolded the napkin note again, her fingers tracing the edges. She shouldn't have felt what she did. He was too far above her world, too complicated, too dangerous to her peace. But the truth pulsed quietly in her chest. She was falling for him, and she feared that if he ever stopped coming, she'd never be the same again. Henry didn't return for 3 days. The first day, Lily told herself he was busy. The second, she thought perhaps he'd traveled. But by the third, she found herself glancing at the door every time the bell rang, her heart lifting only to sink again. She hated that she cared, hated that she missed someone who belonged to a world so far from hers. On the 4th night, rain poured over the city like a confession. The diner was quiet, the usual crowd gone. Lily stood by the window, watching the blurred streetlights through the glass. She was about to close early when the door opened, and Henry stepped inside, soaked to the bone. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, eyes shadowed, hair dripping. Without a word, he walked to his usual booth and sat down, breathing deeply, like someone who had just run from ghosts. Lily hurried to him, her voice soft but firm. "You're drenched. Wait here." She disappeared into the back and returned with a towel and a cup of hot coffee. When she placed it before him, he looked up at her, eyes glassy, grateful, but haunted. "You shouldn't bother. I already did," she said simply. "Drink before it gets cold," he obeyed. The warmth of the cup seemed to steady him. For a moment neither spoke. The rain filled the silence, tapping softly against the glass. Then he said quietly, "I lost everything today." Lily froze. "What do you mean?" "My company, the one I built from nothing. My board turned against me. I trusted the wrong people." He laughed bitterly. "Funny, isn't it? I spent years making sure no one could ever hurt me again, and the people I kept closest were the ones holding the knife." She sat across from him, her eyes gentle. "Maybe what you lost wasn't everything, Henry. Maybe it's what was never really yours to begin with." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Control. Power. The illusion that you didn't need anyone. You still have yourself. And that's the part they can't take." He stared at her, speechless. No one had ever dared to speak to him like that. Not investors, not partners, not friends. They all told him what he wanted to hear, not what he needed. Her words disarmed him. They didn't heal the wound, but they gave it meaning. After a long pause, he said quietly, "You know, when I first came here, I didn't even like coffee." Lily smiled softly. "What changed?" "You." The simplicity of it stunned her. She looked away, pretending to busy herself with napkins, but her throat tightened. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Henry, I'm sorry about what happened. I know what it's like to lose something that defines you." He tilted his head. "What did you lose?" "My father," she said quietly. "When I was 16, he worked here before me. The diner was his dream, a place where people could feel seen, no matter who they were. When he died, I promised I'd keep that alive. That's why I stay, that's why I care." Henry's jaw tightened, emotion flickering behind his composure. "He'd be proud of you." "Maybe, but I think he'd also tell me to stop giving away my lunch to strange men." Henry chuckled, a real unguarded laugh that surprised them both. It softened his entire face like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. "Would you rather I hadn't?" He met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something raw, longing, maybe. "Regret." "No," he admitted. "You were the first person in a long time who didn't want something from me." "Maybe that's why you came back," she said gently. "Maybe," he murmured. They sat there, the world shrinking to that small booth, the sound of rain, the faint hum of the neon sign. Then his phone rang. He didn't move at first, but when it rang again, he answered. His tone shifted instantly, colder, sharper. "Yes?" "No, the contracts are done. I don't care what the press says. No statements." When he hung up, he looked at her and sighed. "It never stops." "Then stop it," she said simply. "Just for one night. You're not your company, not here." He looked around the diner, the flickering light, the worn tiles, the smell of coffee and rain. "Then what am I here?" She met his gaze. Human. Something in him broke, quietly, invisibly. After a long silence, he said, "You make it sound like being human is a good thing." "It is," she said. "It's the only thing that makes love possible." The word love lingered in the air between them, dangerous, delicate, too heavy to ignore. He looked at her as if he'd never truly seen anyone before, and she, in that moment, saw through all the layers of armor he'd built to hide the man he'd once been. When the rain finally stopped, Henry stood. "Thank you, Lily. For tonight. For everything. Will you be okay?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but for the first time in years I want to try." He left quietly, disappearing into the silver mist outside. Lily watched him go, her reflection trembling in the glass. The diner felt emptier than ever, but something inside her told her that this wasn't the end, that Henry Vale's story and hers had only just begun. And when she turned off the lights that night, she found a folded paper under his untouched plate, another note in his unmistakable handwriting. "You said being human makes love possible. I don't know if I still know how to love, but I think I'm starting to remember." The following week unfolded like a memory that refused to settle. Henry didn't return to the diner, but his absence felt alive. A quiet presence that lingered between the coffee mugs and the sound of the doorbell that never rang for him. Lily told herself she shouldn't care. He was a billionaire, she was a waitress. Their worlds were never meant to intertwine. Yet every time she served someone with dark hair and a crisp suit, her heart leapt before she realized it wasn't him. She started catching herself glancing toward the street at night, wondering if his car would appear again under the flickering lamplight. Then, one evening, a black SUV pulled up across the street. A man in a tailored grey coat stepped out. Not Henry, but someone who clearly belonged to his orbit. He entered the diner with purpose, eyes sharp, demeanor impatient. "Miss Lily Carter?" he asked. She hesitated, setting down her tray. "Yes," he handed her an envelope. "From Mr. Vale." Her heart stuttered. She accepted it carefully, the thick paper cool against her skin. "Is he all right?" The man's expression didn't change. "He asked me to deliver that personally, nothing more." Before she could ask another question, he turned and left, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive cologne and unanswered questions. She stood frozen for a long moment before finally unsealing the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter. "Lily, by the time you read this, I'll be gone from the city for a while. I've made mistakes that need undoing, debts that go beyond money. You made me remember what it felt like to be human again, and that's something I can't repay. But I need to learn who I am without the walls I've built. If I stay, I'll hurt you. If I go, maybe I'll become someone worthy of the kindness you gave me. You once said that love is possible only when we're human. I'm going to try to be that man. Henry." Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't what she expected. Not an apology, not a confession, but something deeper. It wasn't the kind of letter a man writes when he's finished with someone. It was the kind written when he doesn't trust himself to stay. That night she closed the diner alone, reading the letter over and over beneath the dim kitchen light. Each word carried a strange ache, not of loss, but of waiting. Somewhere inside her she knew he would return. But when and as who she didn't know. Months passed. The roses wilted and were replaced with small pots of daisies. The espresso machine gleamed less brightly now, worn by time and constant use. Yet every morning, when Lily brewed the first pot of coffee, she set one cup aside and his cup on the counter near the window, just in case. Then one afternoon, while she was serving a group of construction workers, a voice spoke from behind her. "I thought you'd stopped saving me a seat." The tray nearly slipped from her hands. She turned, and there he was, Henry Vale, but not the man she remembered. His hair was longer, his posture softer, his face tanned by sunlight instead of shadow. Gone was the armor of arrogance. In its place was something startlingly human. "Henry," she breathed. He smiled faintly. "You make my name sound like forgiveness." She didn't move. "Where have you been?" "Fixing the damage I caused," he said simply. "Selling what I didn't need, paying what I owed. I disappeared for a while. It turns out it's not easy to start over when you're used to being worshipped instead of trusted." Lily's throat tightened. "Why come back?" His eyes softened. "Because you were right. Being human isn't about what we have. It's about what we give. And I wanted to give something back. To you." He reached into his coat and placed a small envelope on the counter, just like before. "This time I hope it's not another goodbye," she said quietly. "It isn't." She opened it slowly. Inside was a deed, the ownership papers for the diner. Her eyes widened. "Henry, no. I can't." "Yes, you can," he interrupted gently. "You told me this place meant something, that it belonged to your father's memory. Now it's officially yours." Her voice trembled. "Why would you do this?" "Because you gave me more than a meal when I had nothing left. You gave me a reason to come back to myself. This place was built on kindness. It should stay that way." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the edges of the world. "You didn't have to buy my life, Henry." He stepped closer, his voice low. "I didn't buy it. I honored it." The diner was empty now. Outside, the afternoon light poured through the windows, turning the world gold. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't," he said softly. Just tell me I can sit here again." She laughed, brushing at her tears. "You never really left," he smiled. A small, genuine smile that felt like redemption. "Then maybe now I can stay for the right reasons." As the clock ticked and the coffee steamed between them, neither spoke again for a long time. There was nothing left to explain. The silence wasn't awkward. It was alive, full of everything they'd both learned. And just before the evening crowd began to trickle in, Henry looked at her with that same quiet intensity that once scared her. Only this time it didn't feel like a man trying to control the world. It felt like a man trying to belong to it. "Lily," he said, his tone steady. "There's one thing I didn't write in the letter." She looked up. "What's that?" He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "That I never stopped thinking about you. Not for a single day." Her heart caught between breath and heartbeat. "Then you should have stayed." "I wasn't ready," he said. "But I am now." The doorbell rang, and laughter filled the diner again. But for Henry and Lily, time had slowed to the quiet rhythm of two souls rediscovering each other. For the first time since the day she'd given away her lunch, Lily didn't feel small beside him. She felt seen. And as the golden light pooled across the counter, Henry reached for her hand, hesitant, trembling, real. This time she didn't pull away. The following mornings felt different. Henry became part of the diner's rhythm again, though never in the way people expected. He didn't arrive in sleek cars anymore, or wear the sharp armor of tailored suits. He walked from a modest apartment a few blocks away, sometimes carrying the morning paper, sometimes bringing flowers that looked like they'd been picked from someone's garden rather than bought from a florist. At first, the locals didn't recognize him. When they did, rumors swirled. The billionaire who lost his fortune, the tycoon who vanished, the man who fell for a waitress. Lily tried to ignore it, but she could see how the whispers followed him. Yet Henry didn't seem to care. Every time someone looked at him with curiosity or judgment, he only smiled slightly and went back to stirring his coffee. "I thought you'd hate this," she said one afternoon, wiping a counter while he sat at his usual booth. "People talking, speculating. I used to care too much about what people said," he replied calmly. "Now I just care about what's true." "And what's true?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "That this place feels more like home than every penthouse I've ever owned." Lily didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. And for Henry, her silence was the kindest answer. Over time, they slipped into a quiet companionship. They shared lunches when the diner was empty, laughed over burnt muffins and stubborn coffee machines, and sometimes simply sat together, watching the world move outside the window. But it wasn't all soft edges. Beneath the calm, something deeper stirred. The weight of unspoken feelings and the fragile line between gratitude and love. One evening after closing, Henry lingered as usual. The streets outside were wet with a light drizzle, and the air carried the scent of rain and coffee. Lily was restocking napkins when she felt his gaze on her. "Lily," he said softly. She turned. "Yes? Can I ask you something? Without you thinking less of me?" Her brow furrowed. "I don't think that's possible," he exhaled slowly, his eyes darker than usual. "All my life I thought love was a transaction. You give something, you get something back, attention, loyalty, status. That's what I learned growing up. My father built empires that way." My mother smiled through it. He paused. "And when I lost everything, I realized how empty it all was. But with you..." He stopped, words failing him. "With me what?" she asked gently. "With you I don't want anything. I just want to be." Her chest tightened. There was sincerity in his voice that frightened her. "Henry..." He stepped closer. "You changed the way I see the world, Lily, and I don't know what to do with that." She looked down, pretending to fix her apron, trying to keep her composure. "You don't have to do anything with it." "That's not true," he said. "I can't pretend it's nothing." She finally met his eyes. "You're still rebuilding your life. Don't make me your reason for it." He shook his head. "You misunderstand. You're not my reason. You're my reminder of who I should have been all along." The words hung between them, raw and heavy. She could feel the truth in them, but also the danger, because if she let herself believe, it could destroy the quiet balance they'd found. "I think," she said softly, "you're still learning what love really means." "Then teach me," he whispered. Her pulse raced, and for a fleeting moment, the air felt electric, too close, too real. She could see every flicker of emotion in his eyes, every quiet apology for the man he once was. Then she stepped back. "Go home, Henry." He hesitated but obeyed. She watched him leave, her reflection caught in the window next to his fading silhouette. That night, Lily lay awake listening to the rain, the sound reminding her of his voice, low, steady, impossible to forget. She told herself she'd done the right thing. But the truth was harder. She was afraid. Not of him, but of herself, of how much she already cared. The next morning, the diner was busier than usual. A group of real estate developers sat at the corner table, their suits crisp, their laughter loud. Lily didn't pay them much attention until she heard one of them mention Henry's name. "Can you believe Vale's slumming it here? The guy used to own towers. Now he eats pancakes with the locals. Guess he found a new charity project," another man sneered. "Cute waitress, though." "Maybe that's why he keeps hanging around." Lily froze. The tray in her hand trembled slightly. She turned, ready to say something, but before she could, Henry appeared behind her. He must have heard it too. His jaw tightened, and for a moment she saw the man he used to be. The one who commanded boardrooms and built empires, but instead of lashing out, he simply walked to their table. The room went silent. "Gentlemen," he said evenly. "It's strange how people measure worth. You think power makes a man untouchable. It doesn't. It just hides the parts of him that are already broken." The developers looked uneasy. One muttered, "We didn't mean—" "You did," Henry interrupted, his voice firm but calm. "You just didn't think I'd hear." He leaned slightly forward, lowering his tone. "And for the record, she's not a project. She's the reason I remembered I'm still human." He turned and walked out without waiting for a response. Lily stood frozen, the entire diner still echoing with his words. The developers paid quickly and left in silence. When she finally stepped outside, Henry was there by his car, the rain starting again in thin silver lines. "Henry," she said, breathless, "you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he met her eyes. "I let people treat others like that for years. I won't do it again." Her throat ached with emotion. "You can't fight everyone." "I don't care about everyone," he said quietly. "I care about you." The rain fell harder now, cold and insistent, but neither of them moved. The streetlight above flickered, painting their faces in gold and shadow. Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "Why are you making this harder?" "Because I don't want to lie to you," he said. "Or to myself." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his hair, his voice trembling with something between defiance and fear. "Tell me to stop coming and I will. But if you don't—" She didn't let him finish. "Come inside," she said softly. "You'll get sick." And though her words were practical, her eyes said something entirely different. Henry followed her in, dripping water across the floor, both of them knowing that some lines, once crossed, could never be redrawn. The rain had stopped by the time the clock struck midnight, but inside the diner, the air still trembled with something raw and alive. The lights were dimmer now, casting warm gold over the chrome surfaces. Lily poured Henry a cup of coffee without asking, a quiet ritual they'd fallen into. And for a while, neither of them spoke. He was seated at the counter, damp sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened, his hair darker from the rain. She stood behind the counter, towel in hand, pretending to clean the same spot over and over, trying not to look at him too long. But the silence was heavy with everything unsaid. "You shouldn't have defended me like that today," she finally said. "You made yourself a target." Henry smiled faintly. "I've been a target my whole life. Difference is, now I care about who I stand in front of." She looked up. "Henry—" "No," he interrupted softly, his tone more vulnerable than she'd ever heard. "Let me say this. I spent years buying people's loyalty, controlling outcomes and calling it strength. But I couldn't buy peace. I couldn't buy honesty. And then you gave it to me without asking for anything back." Lily's throat tightened. "You don't owe me anything for being kind." "I know," he said. "That's what terrifies me." The rain had left the windows fogged. Outside, the world was quiet, asleep. Inside, time seemed to pause. Two souls on opposite ends of life, connected by something neither dared to name. Lily tried to change the subject. "So what happens now? You going back to the company?" He hesitated. "No. My lawyers finalized everything last week. I sold the last of my shares." She froze. "You sold everything?" He nodded. "All of it. The papers don't know yet." "Henry, why would you—" "Because it was never really mine," he said, his voice low but steady. "It was built on compromises I can't live with anymore. I used to think legacy was about buildings and headlines. But maybe it's about people, about who you choose to protect when no one's watching." She leaned against the counter, staring at him. "You sound like someone starting over." "Maybe I am." He looked up at her then, eyes searching. "If I start over, would you be part of it?" The words were simple, but they hit her like a tremor. Her heart raced, her breath shallow. She wanted to say yes. Part of her already had. But another part, the cautious part, whispered warnings. "You don't know what you're asking," she said softly. "I do," he replied. "And it's the first time I've ever meant it." Lily shook her head slightly, trying to hold herself steady. "Henry, your world and mine, they don't mix. People like you don't stay. You move on." He looked down for a moment, then back at her. "I don't want to move on from this." Her hand trembled as she set down the towel. "You think what you feel is love. I think it's what I was missing before love even had a name." Lily turned away. The walls felt too close, her pulse too loud. "I can't do this," she said under her breath. He rose slowly from the stool, his reflection merging with hers in the window. "Because you don't want to, or because you're afraid you do?" She met his gaze in the glass, two figures blurred by condensation, both carrying ghosts of who they used to be. "Good night, Henry," she said quietly. He stood there a moment longer, then nodded. "Good night, Lily." When he left, the diner felt colder. The coffee machine hummed, the neon flickered, and she finally let out the breath she'd been holding. For the next week, Henry didn't come. Not once. Lily told herself it was for the best. That distance would clear their confusion. But as each day passed, she found herself glancing at the door whenever it opened. The stool he used to occupy became a small ache in the corner of her eye. Meanwhile, across town, Henry was living quietly in his new apartment, far smaller than anything he'd ever owned, overlooking the river instead of the skyline. He spent his mornings reading, his afternoons walking, and his nights thinking of her. He tried to write her a letter once. He tore it up before finishing. Words had always been his weapon, but now they failed him completely. On the 8th day, he couldn't stand it anymore. He drove back to the diner, only to find it dark. The lights were off, chairs stacked, a closed sign hanging crookedly in the door. Panic flickered through him. He got out, looked through the glass, and saw no one inside. A man sweeping the sidewalk next door noticed him. "You looking for Lily?" he asked. Henry's pulse jumped. "Yes, what happened?" "She's fine," the man said. "Her mother had surgery in another town. She took a few days off to take care of her." He nodded, exhaling in relief. "Do you know when she'll be back?" "Maybe by the weekend," the man shrugged. Henry drove home, but sleep didn't come. The thought of her caring for someone else, quietly, selflessly, without anyone watching, stirred something deep in him. He realized that was what had drawn him from the start. She didn't live for show. She lived for meaning. When Saturday came, he returned to the diner early before opening. The lights inside were still dim, but she was there, arranging pies behind the glass counter, humming faintly. She looked up and froze when she saw him. "Henry, I heard you were gone," he said softly. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." She smiled faintly, tired but genuine. "Mom's okay. It was just a minor surgery. I had to be there. I'm glad," he said. "I missed you." Her smile faltered. "Henry—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "You don't owe me anything. I just needed to see you." She hesitated, then nodded toward the stool. "You can sit," he did. For a while, neither spoke. Then, almost without thinking, he reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the counter. "What's that?" she asked. "Something I wrote and couldn't send." She looked at it but didn't touch it. "Why give it to me now?" "Because I don't want to hide what I feel anymore." Lily's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. She hesitated, then unfolded the letter inside. It was handwritten, unpolished, and painfully honest. "You made me believe kindness isn't weakness. You made me realize wealth isn't what I own. It's who I am when no one's looking. And if love ever finds me again, I hope it looks like you." Her vision blurred halfway through. When she looked up, Henry was still watching her, eyes soft and unguarded. She set the letter down, her voice breaking slightly. "Henry, this isn't fair." "I don't know how to fit into your world." He shook his head. Then let me fit into yours." Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't hide. "You don't belong here," he smiled sadly. "Maybe that's the point." The doorbell jingled just then, the first morning customer walking in, breaking the spell. She wiped her eyes quickly and went to greet them. Henry stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the letter now faintly stained by her tears. Then he stood, leaving quietly, the echo of her voice still haunting the space between them. Outside, the sky was pale gold, and for the first time, Henry realized he wasn't trying to reclaim his old life anymore. He was chasing something far rarer, something he wasn't sure he deserved. The city was dressed in autumn colors now, leaves blazing in shades of amber and rust, and yet Henry felt more lost than ever. It had been 2 weeks since he'd given Lily the letter, 2 weeks without a single word from her. He'd left the diner that morning believing the silence between them might break the next day or the next after that, but it hadn't, and the ache of it had begun to settle deep inside him. He walked every morning by the river, thinking about what he'd said, what he'd written, and whether he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Lily, meanwhile, was trying to make sense of her own confusion. The letter had changed everything. She'd read it over and over, each time feeling both closer to him and more terrified of what that closeness meant. She wasn't used to being seen that deeply. She wasn't used to being the reason someone's life began to shift. She'd told her mother about Henry one evening, carefully omitting his wealth. "He's complicated," she'd said. Her mother had smiled faintly. "Everyone is. The good ones just admit it." But Lily still hesitated. Her world was small, simple, honest, and Henry's, she feared, could swallow it whole. When he walked into the diner again one evening, her heart betrayed her with how fast it beat. He looked different, softer somehow. The suit was still there, but the sharpness had dulled. His tie hung loose, his hair wind-tousled. He didn't look like a man who owned half a city. He looked like one who'd finally decided to belong somewhere. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," she said quietly as he sat down. "I wasn't sure you wanted me to," he replied. She poured him coffee. The smell of it filled the air, familiar, grounding. "I read your letter again last night," she admitted. He looked up, searching her face. And she took a breath. "And I realized something. You keep trying to prove that you can change. But you don't have to prove it to me." "Then who?" "To yourself." Her words landed with quiet precision, the way truth often does. He stared into his cup, the steam rising like ghosts of the past. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "Yes, you do," she said gently. "You already have." He smiled faintly, almost in disbelief. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she replied. "But it's real." There was a pause, long and tender, broken only by the low hum of a jukebox in the corner. Then she added softly, "Why do you keep coming back, Henry?" He met her eyes. "Because here I remember who I was before I stopped feeling." She felt her throat tighten. "You talk like a man who lost something." "I did," he said. "Someone I loved once told me money would never protect me from pain. I didn't listen. She died before I could tell her she was right." Lily's eyes softened. "Your wife?" He nodded. "She was sick for a long time. I buried myself in work to avoid watching her fade. By the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. Everything I built after that, it was just noise." For a moment, the weight of his confession hung between them, raw, unadorned. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her then, really looked, and in her eyes he saw no judgment, no pity. "Just presence, don't be," he said. "You're the first person I've told in 10 years. Outside, thunder murmured in the distance. The lights flickered once. Lily glanced toward the window. "You should probably head home before the storm hits." "I don't mind storms," he said quietly. "They remind me that even the sky has to let go sometimes." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a poet tonight. Maybe it's the company," he said. The moment stretched and fragile, beautiful, until the door opened and broke it. A man in a long coat stepped inside, shaking off the rain. His gaze landed on Henry. "Mr. Cole," he said, surprised. "We've been trying to reach you. The board wants to know if the acquisition deal is moving forward." Lily froze. Henry's last name, Cole. She remembered it from the newspaper headlines years ago. "Cole Industries, one of the largest real estate empires in the country," the man continued, oblivious to her expression. "The investors are waiting for your confirmation." Henry's voice was calm. "Tell them the deal's off." The man blinked. "Off, sir." You heard me, but I said off. The man hesitated, nodded stiffly, and left. Silence filled the diner again. Lily was still staring at him, her pulse racing. Cole, she murmured. You're that Cole, he sighed. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't want that name between us. Between us? She said softly. Henry, your name is between us. It's everything you are out there. It doesn't have to be everything I am in here. She didn't know what to say. For a moment she felt small, insignificant, like their worlds were galaxies apart. He saw it in her eyes. You think this changes what I feel? He asked. She shook her head. No, but it changes what I can do about it. Rain began to fall hard outside, streaking the windows with silver. The neon sign flickered, washing her in warm pink light and him in cool blue. Two people, divided by color, by class, by fear, but drawn together like gravity. I don't want your money, she said finally. I don't want a man who can buy my world just to understand it. He leaned forward, voice quiet but fierce. Then what do you want, Lily? She met his gaze, steady now. I want you to stay even when there's nothing left to buy. The power flickered again, and in that brief darkness, Henry realized he'd just been handed the only condition that ever truly mattered. The lights came back, and she was still standing there, honest, unwavering, human. He whispered almost to himself, then maybe this is where everything begins. But she turned away, her voice trembling. Or where everything breaks. He didn't argue. He just watched her, memorizing the way the stormlight danced on her face, knowing something in both of them had shifted forever. And as the thunder rolled across the city, Henry finally understood the price of every empire he'd ever built, and the quiet cost of one woman's truth. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered. For 3 days, Henry didn't return to the diner. The world outside kept moving, meetings, contracts, obligations, but he felt suspended between two realities, the one built on power and the one that had reminded him what it meant to feel. He sat in his penthouse one evening, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass. The city lights below looked like a constellation he no longer belonged to. His assistant had left hours ago, and silence pressed in from every corner. The untouched dinner on his table had gone cold. He thought of Lily, her voice steady, her eyes honest, her refusal to be impressed by anything but sincerity. He thought of how she'd looked that night, standing by the window with rain in her hair. When his phone buzzed, he didn't expect the name that appeared. It was Elliot, his oldest friend, the only person who still spoke to him like the man he'd been before his empire. You sound worse than usual, Elliot said after a moment. Henry exhaled softly. It's nothing. It's never nothing with you. What happened? He hesitated. Someone told me the truth. I think that's what happened. Elliot chuckled quietly. And you didn't like it? I needed it, Henry admitted, but I don't know what to do with it. Maybe stop trying to do something, his friend said. Just let it change you. Henry looked out the window again. The reflection of his own face stared back, polished, composed, empty. I'm not sure I know how anymore. Then find someone who reminds you, Elliot said simply, before you lose the chance. Henry didn't sleep that night. He drove before dawn, the streets slick and empty, the city not yet awake. When he arrived at the diner, the lights were still off. He parked and waited. By 6, Lily appeared, her hair pulled back, coat wrapped tight against the cold. She unlocked the door, unaware of him sitting in the car. For a moment, he just watched. Her mean the way she moved with quiet purpose, unaware of her grace. He got out and crossed the street. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. She looked up, startled. You shouldn't be here this early. We're not open yet. I know, he said, but I needed to see you. There was tension in her eyes, but also something softer, something that hadn't quite decided whether to let him in or shut him out. I've been thinking, he continued, about what you said about staying. She set down her mug and faced him. And? I sold one of my companies yesterday, he said quietly. The biggest one. Her brow furrowed. Why? Because I didn't build it for the right reasons. I built it to hide behind. She stared at him, trying to read his expression. And what now? He smiled faintly. Now I'm trying to remember what it's like to build something that matters. Henry, she said softly, you don't have to prove yourself to me. I'm not, he said. I'm trying to prove to myself that I can live differently, that maybe there's more to life than transactions. Her eyes softened. You think selling one company fixes that? No, he admitted, but it's a start. She poured him coffee without asking. You can't keep buying your way into redemption. I'm not trying to, he said. I'm trying to earn it. They sat in silence for a while, the smell of coffee filling the space between them. The diner slowly came to life, the hum of lights, the clatter of pans, the quiet rhythm of morning. When the first few customers came in, Henry moved to a corner booth. He watched Lily work, moving from table to table, smiling, listening, caring. Things money couldn't buy. At one point, a little boy dropped his muffin and burst into tears. Lily knelt, cleaned up the crumbs, and handed him another one, whispering something that made him laugh. Henry found himself smiling too, and for the first time in years, he felt the simple peace of just being. When the rush ended, Lily joined him. You're quiet today, she said. I'm watching, he replied, trying to understand how you do it. Do what? Make people feel like they matter. She looked at him, her voice gentle. Maybe because they do. He nodded slowly. I used to think people only mattered if they could give me something. Now I realize that's why I lost so much. There was a flicker of sadness in his tone that she didn't miss. You can stop losing, you know. How? By choosing differently. Henry studied her, the way her eyes held quiet conviction. And if I'm too late? She smiled faintly. Then start anyway. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, he waited until the last customer left. Then he reached into his coat and placed an envelope on the counter. I wanted you to see this, he said. She opened it carefully. Inside was a document, the deed to the diner. Her eyes widened. Henry, what is this? I bought it, he said simply. But not for me. For you. She froze. You what? You once told me you wanted to open your own place someday, he said. You already made this one feel like yours. Now it is. Lily's voice trembled. You can't just give me a diner. I'm not giving it to you, he said softly. I'm giving it back, to the people who made it worth something. Tears welled in her eyes. Why are you doing this? He hesitated, then said, because you gave me back something too. You gave me the part of myself I thought was gone. She tried to speak, but words failed. The air between them was thick with emotion. Gratitude, disbelief, something deeper neither dared name. Henry, she whispered finally, I don't need this to believe you've changed. I know, he said, but I needed you to know what you've done for me. He turned to leave, but she caught his arm. Henry! He stopped, his gaze meeting hers. She took a shaky breath. You can't keep fixing everything with grand gestures. Sometimes the smallest ones mean more. He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled softly. Then tell me what small thing I should do. She stepped closer, her hand resting over his heart. Stay, she said. Just stay. He didn't speak, didn't promise. He just nodded, the kind of nod that meant something inside him had finally surrendered. Outside, the city lights flickered like stars reflected in rain, and for the first time in his life, Henry Cole didn't feel the urge to leave. The diner looked different that morning, not in its walls or colors, but in the quiet hum that filled it. Henry sat in his usual booth, coffee untouched, watching Lily move behind the counter. The light through the windows caught in her hair, soft and golden. For the first time in years, he wasn't planning anything. He wasn't calculating or protecting himself. He was simply there. A few weeks had passed since the day he handed her the deed. She hadn't spoken much about it since. She'd just kept working, serving coffee, greeting customers, laughing with regulars, as if nothing had changed. But something had. Everyone could feel it. The diner had become fuller, warmer. People lingered longer, talking to one another. Strangers became friends. Lily had a way of turning routine into comfort, and Henry found himself staying longer each time he came. One afternoon, an old woman walked in carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. "For the girl who still smiles like she means it," she said, handing them to Lily. "You make this place feel alive." Lily blushed, touched by the gesture. Henry watched. From his seat, his chest tightening with a feeling he hadn't known in years, quiet admiration that bordered on something deeper, something dangerously close to love. Later, when the diner quieted, he approached the counter. "You've built something beautiful here," he said. She smiled gently. "We have. You're part of this now too." He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "I don't think I've ever been part of anything before." Lily tilted her head. "Then maybe it's time you stop standing outside your own life," he chuckled softly. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she said, "but it's possible." A pause. The clock ticked softly behind them. He could have filled the silence with business talk or polite gratitude, but instead he asked almost quietly, "Why did you help me that first day? You didn't know who I was." She looked at him, her voice steady. "You looked like someone who hadn't been asked how he was in a long time." He exhaled, eyes lowering. "You were right. People forget," she said softly. "Money hides pain, but it doesn't heal it." He nodded, his throat tight. "I've spent years hiding behind it, and when I finally stopped, you were the first thing I saw." She looked away, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped the counter. "Henry." "I know," he said quietly. "You don't have to say anything." The moment stretched between them, delicate, charged. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "I'm not used to people like you staying. Then let me be the first." Time blurred after that. The diner became their meeting ground, between worlds, between lives. Henry still wore his tailored suits, still carried the composure of a man born to command rooms. But here, none of it mattered. Here he was just a man who learned to listen, to care, to be still. He began helping with small things, fixing a light, refilling the coffee machine, clearing tables when it got busy. The regulars started greeting him with warmth instead of wariness. To them, he wasn't the billionaire from the papers anymore. He was just Henry. One evening after closing, Lily sat across from him in a booth, their plates empty but their conversation full. They talked about everything. The city, her dreams, the kind of peace that only comes when you stop running. "You know," she said, smiling softly, "you're different now." He raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "You laugh more. You listen. You look at people." He smiled faintly. "That's because I finally met someone worth looking at." She looked down, heart racing. "Henry." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know." She looked up, tears brimming. "You don't owe me anything. I know," he said, voice low. "But I want to give you everything anyway." Outside, the rain began again, soft, rhythmic, like the sound of memory finding peace. Months later, the diner's sign was changed. The new name glowed above the door. Lily's Place. It wasn't fancy, but it meant something. The place had become a heartbeat in a city too busy to listen. Henry was there every morning now, not as a customer, not as an owner, but as someone who had finally learned to belong. He still took calls sometimes, still managed his remaining businesses, but he no longer lived through them. His life was no longer defined by numbers, but by moments. One morning, a small boy came in, holding a crumpled drawing. "This is for you, Mr. Henry," he said shyly. Henry unfolded it. It showed a man and woman behind a counter, smiling with a heart between them. He laughed softly. "That's beautiful." "Who's this supposed to be?" "You and Miss Lily," the boy said proudly. Lily turned, hearing her name, and saw the drawing. Her laugh was quiet, tender. "He got your hair right," she teased. Henry smiled. "And he got your heart right." She met his eyes. Those blue eyes that once looked like ice, now full of warmth. Maybe he did. That evening, after the last customer left, Henry locked the door behind them. The city's light spilled in through the window, painting gold over her face. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The big meetings, the cars, the parties?" He shook his head slowly. "Not for a second. I used to think success was about being untouchable. But you showed me it's about being real," she smiled softly. "You were always real, Henry. You just forgot." He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. And you reminded me. The silence between them felt like a held breath. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his hand trembling slightly. She didn't move away. I don't know what this is, she said softly, but it feels... Right, he nodded. That's enough for me. Their foreheads touched, and in that small, quiet moment, surrounded by the scent of coffee and the hum of a city that had forgotten how to pause, everything fell into place. Two worlds that were never meant to meet had finally found balance. Not through wealth, not through rescue, but through the simple, impossible miracle of being seen. Outside, the old neon sign flickered once before glowing steady again, a soft, warm light in the dark, because sometimes love doesn't arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it sits across a counter, sharing coffee, and quietly changes everything. Subscribe to be part of stories that still believe in love.